The Washington Commanders got a new safety, but did they get the right one to replace Jeremy Chinn? Even though he wasn't my top choice, Will Harris sure looks the part, but that's not all on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's live episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you Monday through Friday, your eyes and ears and friend on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Also find me helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team as well. I want to thank you for coming through today for this episode in which we're going to talk about everything encapsulating day 2 of the open negotiating period. We are on the eve of the new league year beginning 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, and all of these moves that you're hearing about happening are agreed to deals, can become official on Wednesday. So we're going to talk about what happened on Tuesday. We're going to look at the best remaining free agents around the league and for the Washington Commanders. We're talking about Jonathan Allen having a new home, Jeremy McNichols staying home, and we're going to start it all off by talking about Will Harris, new Commanders starting strong safety, potentially. Everydayers, those of you who come through every day for every episode, I want to give you a special thank you. If you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this show. And if you're new to the program, guys, we've had about 700, 800 new subscribers just in the last couple of weeks. I appreciate all of you, the new Locked On Commanders listeners and viewers coming through here in the recent times. If you're new to the show, glad you found us. Hopefully you like what you hear, or at least you like the format of what you hear it in, even if you don't agree. I always tell you, agreeing is not a prerequisite to watching the show. So I appreciate you coming through for Locked On Commanders. This is a daily podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So make sure you come back often. The Washington Commanders got a new safety on Tuesday, agreed to terms on a new contract with safety Will Harris. Now, on the surface, I should say, it looks like a direct replacement potentially for safety Jeremy Chinn, who did leave via free agency, agreeing to terms with the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't know why I almost said Los Angeles Raiders, dating myself big time with that one. But Jeremy Chinn agreed to terms with the Las Vegas Raiders. He's going to be on his way out. Will Harris is going to be on his way in as early as Wednesday evening, coming in to be potentially that new starting strong safety, like I said. But before I get into more of my thoughts on this latest move by the Washington Commanders, I did want to enlist the help of one Mr. Ross Jackson. Will Harris coming from the New Orleans Saints. So let's hear from the host of Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson. And I asked Ross, buddy, what are we getting in Will Harris?
Hey, David. So the signing of Will Harris Jr. at safety, I think, is an excellent one for the Washington Commanders. They loved him here in New Orleans, and I thought that he was a pretty good fit. I actually had hoped that the Saints would re-sign him. He's a downhill safety, physical player, hard hitter. He's really, really good communicator as well. Talks a lot on the field, communicates, kind of runs his guys as a quarterback of the defense, does a really, really good job across all that. So poise, experience, feisty play, big hitting, great communicator. Consider him to be a little bit more of a downhill safety than a deep coverage safety. He's a guy that can come down, play in the box, play closer to the line of scrimmage, those things as well, and can split the field in coverage too, but he's really kind of that lurker, kind of downhill guy. I know I keep saying that, but that's really his brand of football over on the defensive side. So if you're looking for somebody to give a defense a jolt, bring some energy, and be a good leader, you got him in a Will Harris Jr. He missed some games last year here in New Orleans because of a hamstring injury that sent him to injured reserve, but behind the scenes here in New Orleans, there was a lot of confusion about why he was placed on injured reserve. The Saints kind of mishandled IR quite a few times here in New Orleans last year. One of the reasons why that regime is no longer here in the city running that team. So I think that I wouldn't be worried about his injury history from last year, and he's definitely a guy that provides some good leadership and those qualities that I highlighted before. Should be a really, really good fit there in Washington for an aggressive attacking defense, like a typical Dan Quinn adjacent or led scheme. So excellent signing for the Washington Commanders. And you'll enjoy him in the locker room too. Great dude.
All right. So once again, that's Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints giving us the down and dirty about new Commander safety Will Harris. And you got to love what you hear from Ross Jackson. And again, Ross on the ground there every day covering the New Orleans Saints. And look, I'm talking to a bunch of people. It just so happens that I might actually know a few more people on the Saints beat than I actually do on the Commanders beat, which is kind of weird to do that, considering I've never lived in New Orleans or covered the New Orleans Saints. But that is the business. You get to know people as you get to know people, and that's just, I've got to know a lot of people on the Saints beat, and they pretty much all say the same thing, man. Will Harris, you hear it, leadership, you hear aggression, you hear downhill safety, right? So these are all the kinds of things that are going to make you think that Will Harris could be that 1-for-1 swap with Jeremy Chinn. But the thing about Will Harris is he also does more, right? He's played free safety. He's played cornerback. He's even got listed snaps as a linebacker in his NFL career. So Will Harris is a guy that really is going to give Joe Witt Jr. the ability to kind of just see where does he best fit. And I think what this means is when you start looking forward to even more free agent possibilities, strong safeties, if you see that kind of strong safety type or that linebacker safety hybrid type, don't necessarily take him off your board. He may still be a possibility for this team, whether it's a cheap free agent or whether it's a draft pick. I'm not going to tell you like first round pick, strong safety type of thing or anything like that, but you could still see the position added to. And also don't forget, we've got Dominique Hampton, who, interestingly enough, was kind of full-blown transitioned into a linebacker last year. Didn't really get a lot of safety / linebacker work, but at the same time, he's already got the safety experience. So the Washington Commanders said, look, we're going to spend this rookie year really indoctrinating you into linebacker play. Well, he's already got the safety, right? So you can kind of already give him that hybrid role. So maybe Dominique Hampton is a guy that steps in as a depth safety / linebacker hybrid player. Tyler Owens, right, had some injury issues there at the end of the season, but he's certainly that type of a player as well. So the Washington Commanders clearly know the style of player that they want, and Will Harris sounds like, right, and early going, look, I watched some highlight reels of Will Harris, right? I haven't gotten to dive into all 22 and full tape on him, but I did watch some highlight reels. Guys, I like what I see. And I'll tell you, Justin Reed, former Kansas City Chief, he's now actually going to the New Orleans Saints. So Justin Reed was my top target once Jeremy Chinn left. But, I'm telling you right now, I'm not looking at Will Harris right now as any type of consolation prize. 6'1", 206 pounds, 29 years old, turns 30 in December, right? So he's not going to hit 30 until late in the year. This is a guy who's been to Detroit. He was a third-round pick by the Detroit Lions originally, 1 year in New Orleans last year before he comes here to Washington. And when you look at his grade chart from Pro Football Focus, decent coverage grade in 2024, 61.6. You love that to be higher, but again, if he's not going to be asked to be that coverage safety all that often, you're okay with that. Run defense of 63.1 overall, best run defense season of his career coming in 2024. So that was the player that the Washington Commanders agreed to. Again, I will put a timestamp on this, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. That is what we're talking about here. Anything that happened after 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, unless you drop it in the live chat to tell me about it, I'm not going to know about it until we get off of this stream. So just full disclosure there. The deal is reportedly 2 years, $10 million, up to $10 million for Will Harris. Jeremy Chinn, you'll remember, got about 16 million, actually over 16 million. So Will Harris going to cost the Washington Commanders right around half of what Jeremy Chinn cost the Las Vegas Raiders. Potentially one of the reasons that maybe Jeremy Chinn is not back with the Washington Commanders. I know a lot of us were kind of bummed not to see Jeremy Chinn come back, but again, just in the early goings of what we're seeing with what Will Harris might potentially bring to the Washington Commanders, can't be too upset about who they went out there and landed. Jonathan Allen, former Washington Commanders defensive tackle, probably not all that upset about where he ended up with the Minnesota Vikings in day 2 of free agency. And Jeremy McNichols is coming back. The impact of both of those signings coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment sometimes, but it's just as important as it is as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with BetterHelp, you can save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. And remember, therapy isn't just for those tough, super traumatic times. Obviously, those times you might need some help as well, but it's a great tool for learning coping skills and setting boundaries and just dealing with everyday stress. Your well-being is worth it. So visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Continue now today's live episode of Locked On Commanders, the end of day 2 of the open negotiating period. We are at the eve of the beginning of the new league year, the 2025 NFL season, officially beginning on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So all of these deals that you're hearing about being agreed to and all those kinds of things, that is when those deals can be made official. The Deebo Samuel trade can be made official as of 4 p.m. Eastern Time. All of these things doesn't mean they necessarily will be made official all right at that time, right? You got to get guys in, guys got to fly in, coordinate all this stuff and do all that kind of stuff, right? But that is the situation we are facing here. However, one player who did not have to wait, Jonathan Allen, former Washington Commanders defensive tackle, released before the beginning of free agency. The Washington Commanders aiming at allowing him as much runway into free agency as possible to go out there, find a new team, sign a new deal. He did exactly that, was visiting with the Minnesota Vikings on Monday. And on Tuesday morning, it was revealed that Jonathan Allen has agreed to a 3-year, $60 million deal. That coming from Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero of NFL Network. That's a really good deal for Jonathan Allen. For one, $20 million a year on average. He's got guaranteed money now. The contract that he was on with the Washington Commanders that they released him from wasn't due any guaranteed money, so there were no promises of any cash whatsoever. So this is going to have some guarantees. I don't know what the exact guarantees are on it, but he is going to get guaranteed money. And obviously that is the goal that Jonathan Allen went into this whole situation with. So congratulations, John. If you're watching, wish you nothing but the best, brother, man. I've never had anything but never had any bad interactions with Jonathan Allen. Look, this job is requires a level of honesty, right? So we talk about some of the comments he's made, some of the plays had on the field, all those types of things. But there's a professional line there. Never crossed that. Jonathan and I always had a really good interaction. So wish him all the best. Jeremy McNichols, another guy that I wish all the best to. Really good dude. I remember him getting drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in 2017. And all these years later, our paths cross again. Turns out they're going to cross again in 2025 because Jeremy McNichols agreed to a 1-year deal coming back to the Washington Commanders. Don't have the finances on that, but I can promise you right now it's not going to be very much. Only the second time since 2017. So again, 2017, Jeremy McNichols enters the NFL. Only the second time in his career that he will stay with the same team for consecutive seasons. So drafted by the Bucs, made his NFL debut for the 49ers. Next season, he played for the Indianapolis Colts. Year after that was Jacksonville. 2 years, 2020, 2021 for the Tennessee Titans. So that was the first time he was able to spend more than 1 year with a single team. Was with the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2022, but he suffered an injury, ended up going on IR, didn't get to play. 2023 was back with the Niners, and obviously 2024 with the Washington Commanders, career high 261 rushing yards in 2024 for the Commanders, 288 total scrimmage yards, second highest of his career total. So now he will be back for 2025 we'll see. Potentially back up Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler. I got a lot of insiders who are big Chris Rodriguez fans. You guys know if you've been listening to the show for a while, I'm a big Chris Rodriguez guy. I think that Chris is untapped potential. He's still got potential. He needs to reach himself, but also this coaching staff can get out of him. I would say all the guy does is ball when he gets on the field. Jeremy McNichols, however, I will tell you, flat out won that number 3 job in training camp. Chris Rodriguez, he and I talked offline about it. I'm not going to get into all the details, but Chris Rodriguez didn't have the best camp, of everybody, and very much so Jeremy McNichols came out of training camp last year as that number 3 back. Now, what I expect is for Jeremy and Chris, as it stands right now, just looking at the roster, to go into training camp this year battling it out for that 3rd spot again, and we'll see how Chris Rodriguez can come in. We'll see how he's able to perform and how Jeremy is able to perform, and see which guy earns that job. And you guys know it. If I believe Chris Rodriguez should have earned that job, but he didn't get it, I would tell you. So when I tell you Jeremy McNichols earned that job, hopefully you can trust that is true. Of course, we still got the NFL draft as well. So we'll see what goes on there with the Washington Commanders running back room as it continues to develop. So that's the latest news from day 2. So one new free agent agreed to terms with the Washington Commanders. One guy brought back, and then Jonathan Allen, who we already knew the Washington Commanders were going to lose on his way out. That signing, Jonathan Allen to the Minnesota Vikings, does not impact the Washington Commanders' potential to earn compensatory picks in the 2026 NFL Draft. We'll get a little bit more into that here in a minute. But before we do that, I did want to go over the remaining list of Washington Commanders free agents. Let's kind of go over the best and any rumors that we might have been hearing, guys that I think could still come back because there are still a lot of roster spots to fill out for this team. Center Michael Dieter, not a lot on the wire about him. Don't expect him back. Cornerback Michael Davis, don't expect him back. Cornerback Noah Igbenogany. So went into this whole experience not necessarily expecting Noah Igbenogany to come back, but a lot of these slot corners are off the board. Jordan Lewis from the Dallas Cowboys was my favorite. He's going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So as these slot corners come off the board, there is a potential, and even as these perimeter corners come off the board, there's a potential that Noah Igbenogany could potentially come back, right? He obviously knows the system very well. I don't think he played terribly in the 2024 season. Pretty much delivered on what I promised you about him when he first came to the team, that he's a guy who's kind of good for an illegal hands or DPI. Pretty much once a game, you can kind of go into expecting it. If you get a game where he doesn't get one, you're happy to have it. And he basically proved to be that. But you like the aggression in him. You like the ball skills as far as, being a long player, being able to kind of track and stay with the receiver. So I wouldn't have an issue at all with Noah Igbenogany potentially coming back. Cornerback Benjamin St-Juste, not a lot out there on him. Don't expect him back. Defensive end Cleveland Farrell, also don't expect him back. Defensive end Jalen Holmes is an interesting guy because as the Washington Commanders continue to go through without a new starting edge, right? There are some guys that we'll talk about in the NFL top remaining free agents list. DeMarcus Lawrence is still out there. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson, he hasn't been re-signed or extended by the Bengals, also hasn't been traded. I reached out to James Rapine of Locked On Bengals. He is on the ground every day, Bengals beat reporter there in Cincinnati. And, I kind of said, I was like, hey, dude, like a little bit eerie almost how much we're not hearing about Trey Hendrickson. And he said, listen, the Cincinnati Bengals are not in a rush. They have no problem making people uncomfortable. They have no problem making people wait to pull this thing out. So, don't necessarily, it could happen while we're doing this episode right now. It could happen, I don't even know, like a month from now, right? Before the NFL draft drops. So Trey Hendrickson, obviously a name out there, but look, either way, Jalen Holmes, he's a local product, right? From the local area, went to Ohio State. So he's, got teammates on the team, Terry McLaurin, things like that. So you wouldn't hate to see him. Plus what he was able to do with the reps that he got, very impressive. So you wouldn't mind seeing him come back at all. Defensive tackle Sheldon Day is another one. Even with the addition of Javon Kinlaw, you've got Johnny Newton, Deron Payne. Having a guy like Sheldon Day there as your fourth DT, a veteran presence, wouldn't hate that at all. Kicker Austin Seibert, still a free agent. Wouldn't hate him coming back to compete with Zane Gonzalez. Linebacker Nick Bellore, special teams ace, certainly filled that role well. Wouldn't hate seeing him come back. Offensive lineman Trent Scott. Don't forget, Trent Scott, first player ever to receive a touchdown pass from Jaden Daniels. So you got to bring him back, right? Dante Fowler, talked about it on yesterday's episode. If you missed that, you can go back and check that out. But probably don't expect Dante Fowler. Look, never say never, right? He and Dan Quinn have a very tight relationship. So that can overcome a lot of things. I would not hate to see Dante Fowler come back. But like I said yesterday, probably not going to happen. Linebacker Michael Walker is another depth guy you wouldn't hate to see come back. Marcus Mariota is a quarterback that has been tied to a lot of potential locations. The Las Vegas Raiders was one before they traded for Geno Smith. We'll see what happens with the trio of quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and there's a third one that I'm forgetting. Sorry to be disrespectful to that person. Kirk Cousins, that's who I'm forgetting about. Wow, Washington guys. So Kirk Cousins also out there. We'll see what happens with those three, how that impacts Marcus Mariota. If Marcus Mariota doesn't come back to Washington, Jeff Driscoll potentially a candidate to come back to Washington himself. And then Derek Forrest, the rumors on him and that the Dolphins were maybe interested. They did sign a safety on Tuesday themselves or agreed to terms with the safety. So I'm not sure how that's going to impact his future. Wide receivers, KJ Osborne, Jameson Crowder, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Noah Brown as of right now. Pretty much all radio silence. I know a lot of Commanders fans want to see Noah Brown come back given what has happened with the wide receiver room. So that could potentially be a fit there if he wants to come back and if they can work out the math and the numbers. So still a lot of good Commanders free agents out there to potentially be retained or potentially be signed elsewhere. We will get into our list of top remaining NFL free agents as we enter day 3 of open negotiating, but also into the first day of the new league year on Wednesday. That coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. March is here, which means March Madness is here, and FanDuel is going to give you the chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who is going to cut down the nets. Let's look at some current odds on FanDuel right now. The Duke Blue Devils men's team plus 330 favorites to win the men's college basketball championship in 2025. Auburn coming in second with plus 380 odds, while Florida comes in third with plus 750 odds. In the NCAA women's bracket, UConn is plus 290 favorites. South Carolina tied with UConn at plus 290. UCLA third at plus 550. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Back now to wrap up this episode of Locked On Commanders here live at the end of day 2 of the open negotiating period on the eve of the beginning of the new league year. 2025 NFL season officially begins tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And there are still a lot of free agents out here that have not necessarily connected into other teams. Jeremy McNichols, Deebo Samuel, John Bates, Zach Ertz, Laramie Tunsil, Javon Kinlaw, Bobby Wagner, Will Harris, Zane Gonzalez, Tress Way, all part of the new Washington Commanders roster, the 2025 NFL roster, Washington Commanders NFL roster as we know it today. But there are still a good amount of NFL free agents who have not agreed to terms with other NFL teams. And let's go down just kind of the list of the top ones, and we'll talk about some of these guys and whether or not we think that they fit with the Washington Commanders. Amari Cooper is the top guy left on the roster on the list right now. Number 11 overall was his ranking. Look, don't dislike what Amari Cooper potentially brings to the field. Just not really sure, what the money is going to look like, all that kind of stuff. I'd almost rather just bring back Noah Brown, obviously, a guy who has a relationship with Jaden Daniels, a guy who has a proven track record with Jaden Daniels. Asante Samuel, the top corner left in the free agent market. I know some Commanders fans really want Asante Samuel, but the thing about Asante Samuel Jr., back from his days with the Chargers, and I talked to the Locked On Chargers guys about this, and they said, listen, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe NFL.com is missing something, because if you look at the NFL.com top 101, the very first sentence in the Asante Samuel Jr. bio is knocked for his poor tackling and inability to play press coverage. That automatically is a non-starter for Joe Witt Jr., Dan Quinn-led defense. So I reached out to the Locked On Chargers guys. They basically agreed, nah, bro, like he's not going to fit if he ends up there. So again, you know what I mean? Never say never, but I don't think Asante Samuel Jr. is a fit. Cam Robinson, tackle. A lot of people were interested in him potentially. I think obviously with Laramie Tunsil coming in, you can probably forget about that. Stephon Diggs is an interesting option potentially if the Washington Commanders want to go the veteran out. I think he's a little bit more dynamic than Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is a little bit basically of an older Terry McLaurin, but Stephon Diggs has a little bit. He's coming off a torn ACL. That's a big deal. So you don't know what he's going to look like there. Tevin Jenkins, interior offensive lineman, really likes him coming out of college. If the Washington Commanders want to bring in some more competition, especially as you get to this like second wave of free agency after the first couple of days, potentially see him come in. Defensive tackle Javon Hargrave. I'm not sure there's a market there for him. Tight ends we're not going to be interested in. Interior offensive lineman, edge rusher Azeez Ojulari. Look, I was actually pretty high on Azeez Ojulari, a while back. I think that he's still got some untapped potential. I think he's probably better as a situational stand-up edge rusher, kind of like Dante Fowler Jr. was. But if Dante doesn't want to come back for the money that the Washington Commanders are offering, maybe Azeez Ojulari wants to come from the Giants to the Commanders. And then we're going to wrap this up. DeMarcus Lawrence. Look, DeMarcus Lawrence has said he wants to go back to Dallas. He wants to stay in Dallas. He wants to be a Cowboy, all that stuff. But if the numbers don't work. It's the business side of it. DeMarcus isn't what he used to be, but can you trust him to be on that defensive line opposite Dorrance Armstrong, hold his own, at least be a serviceable player, and then maybe go into the NFL draft, targeting a guy like JT Tuimoloau. Why do I always mess up this dude's name? JT out of Ohio State. We will get that right. I promise you by the time he actually gets here, if he gets drafted. Tuimoloau is his name. Develop him behind a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence. Look, I wouldn't hate it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that DeMarcus Lawrence is what he used to be and is what his name, still represents and all that stuff, but potentially a good guy. And then Joey Bosa still out there as well. So some edge rushers that, I don't think any of those guys are necessarily like long-term solutions and fits and all that stuff, but bring them in on a one-year deal, kind of like you did some of these other players last year. Let them compete for that starting job. Maybe draft a guy behind them to develop and grow as time goes. Compensatory picks also getting announced on Tuesday, the Washington Commanders, as expected, 0 compensatory picks. Look, the top free agent got signed away last year, I think it was Cam Curl. They brought in Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz. So for those who don't know the way the compensatory pick process works, I can't give you the full-blown algorithm and formula because I don't know it myself. It's highly convoluted, highly complicated. But basically, the basics of it is they weigh the free agents you lose versus the free agents you add. So if you add more and better free agents than the ones you lose, you don't get any compensatory picks. If you lose more and better free agents than you gain, then you can get compensatory picks. So the reason Jonathan Allen will not equate into the 2026 compensatory pick model is because the Washington Commanders released him. If you release a player, they're not eligible to be considered for your compensatory pick formula. If they have to be the expired contracts only and then signed away. So Jeremy Chinn will be part of the compensatory pick evaluation for the Washington Commanders next year. The good news is Will Harris will also be signing for less money. So obviously, right now, Jeremy Chinn is considered the quote unquote better free agent in the compensatory pick model. Now, playtime and all that stuff comes into it and somewhere in there as well. But as of right now, if you're looking at Jeremy Chinn and Will Harris for a 1-for-1, the Washington Commanders, in the eyes of the model, come in underneath Jeremy Chinn. Therefore, they would be eligible for compensatory compensation. Jonathan Allen was released. Therefore, he's not eligible. Javon Kinlaw comes in as a free agent who had an expired contract. So he also equates into that. If he evens it up with Jeremy Chinn, then perhaps that kind of negates that whole situation. The good news is Laramie Tunsil, Deebo Samuel were traded for. They do not count towards that compensatory pick formula. So that's kind of the way that it works. The Washington Commanders did not get any. The Ravens, Bills, and Cowboys all got 4 each. I'm not going to read down this entire list of compensatory picks, but I will tell you there were 6 issued at the end of the 3rd round. So picks number 97 to number 102 are now going to be in the 3rd round. They'll be compensatory picks. The 4th round, there were 4. The 5th round, there were a handful. 6th round, 7th round, there were even more. So a lot of compensatory picks. I think it was 34 overall, if I remember correctly. I'm not going to take the time to count them out here live on the air, but 30 or so, 32, 34 compensatory picks issued out. Again, the Bills, the Ravens, and the Dallas Cowboys, gross, issued the most with 4 apiece. Last thing we want to talk about, just a little bit of a fun conversation I have with the insiders, the Giants quarterback situation right now. The New York Giants, Tommy DeVito is the only quarterback they have on the roster. I always want to say Danny DeVito. He's the only quarterback they have on the roster. So I asked insiders, if you could pick the Giants quarterback for them, who would you want? Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, or Kirk Cousins? Now, the situation does look like they basically want Aaron Rodgers, and they're kind of asking, basically just waiting for Aaron to decide what he's going to do. A lot of people think he just needs to retire, in which case they'll then pivot to either Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson, you would assume. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a team that are rumored to possibly be interested in Aaron Rodgers and are kind of just waiting to see what A-Rod decides to do. I think, a lot of people said if they were picking for the Giants, they would actually pick Aaron Rodgers because he's just going to tear that team apart from the inside out. I think that's hilarious. I think it's also possibly very true. For me, if I were picking, I would actually probably go Kirk Cousins, right? Kirk Cousins, and I know he had some really good years here in Washington. Don't want to be disrespectful, but I think as far as like ability of these 3 quarterbacks, I think his ability is the furthest into decline. The other part of this is the Giants are kind of in the situation that I see it in. Patricia Train of Locked On Giants could tell you more, but from where I sit, it kind of looks like the Giants need to get a veteran quarterback and then also get a young quarterback to grow behind them, whether that be in the 1st round, early 2nd round, something like that. Kirk Cousins not really known as being a mentor to younger quarterbacks. So, not only would Kirk Cousins come in, not be great, but he also wouldn't be a great mentor for the guy behind him, which only sets that guy back a little bit more, right? So that's kind of why I go Kirk Cousins. Aaron Rodgers, I think he's probably got, if I had to pick one of these 3 quarterbacks to be like the rejuvenated story of the season from older quarterbacks, I would actually pick Aaron Rodgers. I think Russell Wilson has kind of just hit his plateau of what he's going to be until the floor eventually bottoms out. So just some thoughts on the Giants quarterback situation. Obviously not directly related to the Commanders, but clearly as a division rival, it does impact the Washington Commanders. So that's how we're going to wrap up today's episode. We'll come back tomorrow after the beginning of the new league year. Some of these moves should be made final. There is a possibility we will have talked to Deebo Samuel by then as well. So I'll let you know more of that. Insiders, you will get text messages on all of that stuff as you usually do. So make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments about any of that stuff, become a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Next up, make the Locked On NFL Draft your next listen. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez get you ready for NFL draft season. You find that on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this episode. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every dayers. Another special thank you to you for coming through today and every day. Sorry we couldn't get to the live chat today. Just a little bit longer of an episode, but I appreciate everybody who came through the live. Appreciate you coming through, even if you're not live, and for interacting as always. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.